welcome to the Daft Souls podcast. My name is Matt Lees. I'm joined by Quentin Smith.
I'm Quentin Smith.
Quentin slightly rubbed up the wrong way because I just said I was better at action games than he was.
Just before we started the podcast.
And he was like, ugh, they hate you.
Like, it was like a parody of what people think games journalists talk about, of like, if you being like, but I am better at games.
It doesn't matter though. It's just there's certain things are true.
Yeah, sure.
But you're competitive, so it doesn't matter to you.
Let's talk about some video games.
Let's talk about some video games. So I guess we should just jump straight in.
Well, what have we got coming up?
Well, you've got a couple of extra things you'd like to talk about Horizon Zero Dawn. And then, I've played a lot of Nier, and you've played a bit of Nier. But first of all, I say mostly over the last week, other than just dabbling and diving into... I feel like I haven't played much of Nier, even though I've played quite a lot.
I've finished it, haven't you?
No, I haven't. Well, we'll come back to that. I've mainly been just dipping into Zelda more. And I've got to say one thing that I've really realized about this over the past week is oh my word, I feel so sorry for anyone who rushed to that game in order to have some form of like absolute hot take on it, because it is the most glorious like dip in for 2 minutes here and there game I've played possibly ever. And to me, the more I spend time with Zelda, the more I realize it's a game that is just beautifully accentuates the best thing about the Switch, which is the fact that it's not just a handheld, but it's also a home console. It's the fact that it's everything in between as well. And it's the versatility of having this thing that you can just pick up and play for a few minutes in whatever context you want, whether that's just sitting down at your desk or sitting down on your sofa and playing it on a TV for 5-10 minutes, or whether you think I'm just going to chuck it in my bag and play it on the tube for 10 minutes. Or sometimes I find when I'm in the kitchen, I'm like, actually, I'll just leave the little screen up on the side, and in between when I'm waiting 15 minutes for something to be in the oven, I'm just like, well, I'll just have it on the kitchen table and just play it on there.
You'll just explore a Hyrule.
Yeah, and I've not been playing it much, but it's the game which is ideal for that, because you literally just pop into it, and unlike most big open world action things where you kind of jump in and go, what am I doing? What was I doing last? What mission am I on or whatever? In this, sometimes I'm like, oh yeah, what was I doing? Oh yeah, I was going to go and do this. But often I'll just load it up and I'll literally just look around me and go, what's over there? Oh, what's in that hill? And then I'll play it for 10 minutes and I'll just go up a hill. And there'll be something on top of the hill. And I'll go, cool.
You want to like pour out a beer in sympathy for all the games journalists who've had to review stuff like Mass Effect and Grand Theft Auto. I can't remember if I've talked about it on the podcast, but there was a story that a friend of ours, a colleague, John Hicks, who used to work with at Official Xbox.
Yeah.
His talk about reviewing GTA 4 and how they put him in a hotel room with no light, back to back with the one other journalist who had a world exclusive, in like a cupboard with 60-inch TVs in front of them, and then every few hours a pizza would arrive.
I've done that. I've done that for like Call of Duty games and stuff.
I did it for Bulletstorm, and it's just the worst. It's like the same interrogation techniques that people use, whereby you just completely lose all sense of yourself and the game and quality.
Yes,
and then at that point, it's much safer to go, oh, it's great, rather than it's bad, because you're pissing off a lot more people with one attitude than the other.
Yeah, no, that's the thing. And also it's just the weirdness of having, especially with multiplayer games, I remember with like Call of Duty and stuff, when you review those, there would be like, oh, now we're running multiplayer sessions from this time to this time. So you might be really into the single player, but you kind of think, well, yeah, but I need to go and do that. Mm-hmm. So you kind of couldn't miss your slots with that stuff. But it does backfire as well, because on the part of it, yeah, especially with that like review scenario of it just being you and one other person. But I found towards the later stage of these fancy hotel things, they sometimes backfired, because then you actually sit around and talk to other journalists. And I can't remember which Call of Duty it was, but I remember that being one where it's like the multiplayer was really strong. I think it might have been Modern Warfare 3.
But they put you in a room with the other journalists, and then your filthy criticism was allowed to contaminate each other.
Yeah, and there was kind of this moment where everyone was, again, you weren't sure though, because you'd been like blindsided by living in a hotel room with a massive screen, and everything was just like a blur. It's a bit like, Clockwork Orange. You're just like, what the fuck is going on?
It absolutely is that, man, where you're just, your eyes are peeled back and you are Nico Bellic in GTA 4.
Exactly. It's just like, especially
40 hours.
With a AAA first-person shooter, it's just like boom, boom, explosions, guns, light, flashing lights. You're being hurled around you're in a desert, you're doing this, and it's just like, God. You're sleep deprived, it's too much, it's too loud, everything's too much. But then you do have these moments where you kind of quietly go, is this game? Yeah, with other journalists, and everyone kind of goes, I thought that as well.
But like you're whispering this around the water cooler like prisoners who...
Well, it's very difficult, especially with game design, when games are very expensively made. It's very difficult to tell if an extremely expensive game is because there's so much gloss there that you double guess yourself.
So you're thrilling at the fact that Breath of the Wild is just it's just a nice thing to poke.
It's lovely, and I really there's so many people who are now. I think I saw a Polygon article going, maybe I got this wrong, when they were watching their child play it incredibly slowly and exploring and adventuring, and they're like, oh, maybe playing it 100 hours in a week was
that's interesting.
Not the good idea.
And very quickly, following on from our conversation about Horizon Zero Dinosaur, I had a very weird, poignant moment with it this week. I was playing it with my wife on the sofa. She was half watching, and we got to a new area and we found a stormbird. And if people aren't aware of Horizon, and it is quite good, you could definitely play it and have a good time with it. It's very well made, very wonderful.
I think I've seen that. It's big.
The Stormbird is basically a giant crow, and you don't realize how big it is. It's just circling in the air. And then it was exactly that moment that you and I were talking about. The joy of Horizon is in like seeing something and then setting your own objective. So for me, there was no quests telling me to kill the Stormbird, and that made it all the more exciting of like, I'm going to try and shoot it. And then you shoot an arrow and it soars down, spamming lightning and snow at you. And then you tether it to the ground with ropes, starts pecking at you. And the fight was, because I was underleveled for it, a full 15 minutes of just scrapping, and all my guns and stuff were empty by the end of it. But finally it falls down dead. And that was such a pure moment where I'd set my own goals. I had brought this thing down. I'd done everything the game hadn't told me to. And then I realized it completely peaked, and I have no desire to go back to that game again because I kind
of had that with the big T-Rex thing,
right? Yeah,
and that was the same thing. Like I just used all of my ammo, everything I had. But in a way, I kind of didn't like that, and that's when I found that when you were fighting the big epic things, in a way, it was like it wasn't so much peak. It was more enjoyable when you had these enemies that you could ambush and finish off quickly with the right tactics. When it then extended beyond that initial guerrilla attack of using the correct tactics to do things perfectly, but then you still have half a health bar and you have to just chip away at it with other tactics. That was when I thought it fell a bit short.
See, again, this might be a difficulty setting thing, because on hard, you just can't let it hit you. So the whole remaining however long is tremendously tense.
Sure.
And you are panicking. But in any case, I thought it was an interesting end to the conversation you and I had of like, oh, it's so cool when you have organic combats where you are totally in control.
Yes.
And then for me to experience the pinnacle of that, but then the downside is that then erased all the nonsense side quests from the game. Like, why would I be doing that? I've already proved my mastery of the hunt. I don't need to do the hunt subquests where I get mastery tokens. It's like, no, I'm the best. I killed the biggest thing.
Yeah, I found that bit. It's like, hey, why don't you go and kill these things? It's like, mate, I've already killed, like, what are you on about?
Yeah.
Like, why would I need to do that?
Yeah, very curious moment. So yeah, let's talk about some new stuff then.
Sure.
New stuff.
So I've been playing a ton of Nier Automata.
A game. Is it made by Platinum?
Yes, it is. It's made by Platinum, but it's the kind of project lead is still the same guy who worked on the original Nier game, I think. And he's not, I haven't looked into it, to be honest.
Platinum masters of swordy, shooty, gun drama.
And Nier, which was a masterful, odd thing, but wasn't a terribly good game, but lots of people loved because it was just so odd.
What's the elevator pitch for Nier?
I don't know. I like it. Why
is it odd?
It's odd for lots of reasons. It's structurally really weird. It's kind of a Platinum hack and slash 'em up with some like kind of Nier's bullet hell stuff,
right?
Of just dodging things. Those two things gel better sometimes than others. It's a hard game to really pin down because it's so erratic.
It's just a fantasy game. This is the game that's being advertised with that meme of the moon face, right?
Yeah, which is not really that much of a thing. Again, this is why it's so weird. It's kind of about robots, and it's about slashing up robots, but robots are largely used as an analogy for humanity and stuff.
Yeah, so there's that's what you get in Nier as well, right?
Yeah. So a lot of it is just about...
Nier Automata. The sequel.
Yeah, no, I'm talking about that now. I'm not talking about Nier. I've not played Nier.
Oh, right. Let's keep going.
Right, so Nier Automata is basically robots, and it's a hack and slash game where you're killing tons of robots, but then the robots kind of... it uses robots in different ways to kind of talk about humanity and stuff, and often does things which are actually like simple things, but things which video games wouldn't get away with by like exploring themes... Not with much depth, to be honest, but exploring themes lightly that are quite controversial themes.
Oh, yeah?
But using robots.
Like?
I don't really want to get into it too much because it's kind of like that. A lot of it is about the joy of exploration and the joy of discovering that stuff. Because there isn't actually that much more. That's the thing.
I thought the combat was really quite delightful.
It's fine. And this is why I was saying at the start that I kind of feel like my experiences of Nier have been coloured a little bit by my skill at 3D action games, in the fact that it's fine, but I want more. It doesn't really expand at the rate I would like it to in terms of giving you more options, more flexibility. So obviously, like, my favorite Platinum game has to be Bayonetta, which was just a delightful, marvelous combination of stuff. And the game really opened up once you'd finished it once and played it again on hard, and suddenly had all these new options about how you could fight. And you suddenly at that point just went, oh my God, the combat system in this game is just superb.
I am going to send myself a note right now because I never played Bayonetta 2 and I'm going to order that on the Wii right away.
Maybe hold off because I don't know, maybe some other stuff that might be coming out on the PC at some point soon. They've been teasing Bayonetta stuff on PC, so maybe hold out just a week or two, see what happens.
Okay.
I still don't think it will because Nintendo funded it, but it's worth waiting and seeing.
Okay.
Because you'll bite yourself otherwise, kick yourself. But yeah, no, it's not as good as Bayonetta. It has interesting elements that have already, like, it's started to get a little bit of Bayonetta into it, but I've found that after playing it for like 12, 15 hours, the combat is satisfying, but I'm kind of getting a bit tired of it because there's just not quite enough there for me.
You mean in terms of complexity?
Yeah. In terms of like having stuff like, being able to switch between weapons and having dramatically different combo options. It's quite simple stuff. It's quite hack and slashy stuff. It's satisfying though. It's a lovely, fun system.
But the main weird thing I found playing it was that is the bullet hell nature of it. It's the fact that you shoot like a gun game.
Yes.
And you can fire incredible streams of bullets like all the time. And then you're trying to angle the camera while you fight at stuff you want to shoot at. And then combining that with the close range sword slashing stuff while doing robot acrobatics. I'll be honest, the thing I liked most is the animation in it. I thought the sort of motion capture of your robot made protagonist lady was really delightful. She is incredibly cool. I can totally see how it's the same DNA that gave Bayonetta so much life and anima.
Beautiful backflipping around whilst firing bullets. The game actually shines brightest in the in bits like the early stages of the game that you've played, where you are going from having a third person camera action sequence where you're slashing stuff up, shooting things, but then out of nowhere the camera will just swing by and now you're playing a 2D game where either maybe it's like a 2D almost like running platformer where you're still using the same combats but you're on a 2D plane running along sideways, or maybe it's like a 2D shoot 'em up and like you're controlling a little ship thing and shooting bullets, and then maybe it's a top-down shooter now, or maybe it's like a twin stick shooter, and you're going through these scenarios and it's just seamlessly jumping between every genre type you can possibly imagine between third-person action and shooter. And that is like so my jam. I love that.
Oh, really?
Yeah. Like there was actually a game on the PlayStation 2 called The Red Star that was not that great, but I reviewed it really highly. I was young and stupid. But I love that. I love that it was like a combination between a kind of third-person beat-em-up and a bullet hell shooter.
So I like Nier when it's doing those things at the same time. I like a fight where I am forced to shoot and slash and dodge bullets at the same time, but I didn't get anything out of like, and now we're changing the genre of the game because I'm playing a bad twin stick shooter, or now I'm playing a better action game. Like, just I would prefer the developers focus on, and mostly they do because the control scheme is shared.
Those bits are kind of infrequent, and that's the thing. But I love that at the start because it was just so varied. It was just like the fact that they would just seamlessly blend and being like, now it's like a side-scrolling thing. There are elements of that later. Personally, I really like that because it emphasizes the pace of the game, where the game becomes more linear, and it's just like bang, boss fight, shooting stuff, running along sideways, slashing stuff. Now you're jumping into a ship and flying around and shooting stuff and everything's exploding. I just thought it was a lot of fun. But most of the game is spent with this kind of open world exploration, which is a very basic open world. It's kind of like Horizon Zero Dawn, but kind of leaning a bit more towards the aesthetic of like Earth Defense Force.
The slightly shonky aesthetic.
Yes, shonky, simple. It has this open world that is not huge, but has some kind of fun stuff going on, like the biomes just shift. Like you go from being like in a green leafy city, and then like you walk 2 meters this way, and now you're in the desert. So it does a lot of fun stuff with that.
I thought that was pretty well handled in Horizon, given.
Yeah, no, absolutely it is. Like, but that's what I mean is in this, it's just like, fuck it, you're in a desert. Like now there's sandstorms, but like half a mile over there, it's just a green, like leafy European American city.
Sure.
Some areas of the game are better than others. Some aspects of the game are better than others. It's probably one of Platinum's, I mean, that's often true with Platinum games. It's probably one of the lesser erratic ones. But the reason I'm really struggling to like even have a sense of how good it is now is because it has this structure whereby it took me about 10 hours to complete it. But when you complete it, it then pops up being like, hey, by the way, like this is a game that we recommend you complete at least twice.
Because there are twists.
Well, then you start the game again, and you're playing through the same sequence of events, but it's different.
Okay.
Slightly. But it isn't different. It's really hard to explain why. It's basically that it's telling the same story from a different perspective. So nothing changes, right? It's the same sequence of events, but from a different perspective. And so far, I've found that, to be honest, that hasn't added enough.
Do you mean a different character or a different camera angle?
A different character.
Okay.
But so far, I've found that experience hasn't added enough, personally, to warrant me literally playing the same game again. And there are some different things, actually. There are some different sections where it's like, actually, this section is different. This bit's different. It has new things. But I find a lot of what it does is in the first playthrough, there's a lot of very vague stuff, a lot of very vague plotting that I enjoyed. And in the second playthrough, it just elucidates that stuff and makes things a bit more concrete and adds more information, which gives you a more concrete context to everything that you've seen in the first playthrough. But I mean, personally, I found that that's been nice as a kind of icing thing, but I don't really see why it had to be in a second playthrough. But the crucial thing is, I know this game has like 7 playthroughs before you've seen it.
Okay.
But I don't know how, and I know lots of people, this is the weird thing, as I've been like, yeah, I kind of like it, kind of feel like it's peaked. But I've had so many people going, oh no, the best is like yet to come. And I'm like, how long do I have to play this game for?
Oh yeah, but that's also, you're always going to hear that because you're not going to get people who play through Nier Automata 5 times across 40 hours and go, that's rubbish. Yeah. Like if you're playing it through 5 times, you like it, therefore you're going to tell people it's good.
And I do like it. I'm kind of yet to see why everyone's going so banana loco crazy about it.
I mean, it's a Platinum game. It could be the case of like a Dark Souls 2 style situation where people know that Platinum games Bayonetta, and then that resulting in good reviews, and a lot of praise because people want to like Platinum games, even if this one lacks that special majesty and magic that something like Bayonetta
I think it's stylish and it's interesting and it is talking about topics and subjects in a way. Again, in some ways, it feels like one of those games that thematically is interesting, but in a way, rather than being like, this is incredible, it more shines a light on how shallow most video games are. It doesn't necessarily do it in a terribly amazing way. It's just actually dealing with ideas and subject matter that games just don't touch.
I think there's a remastered edition of DMC, Devil May Cry, or the Ninja Theory Devil May Cry out for PS4, right?
I think there might be, it's in part of a package of stuff,
I want to go back and play that because, my God, I like DMC so much.
Well, this is that funny thing, actually. When, this is what I will say for Nier, is when Nier is like firing on all cylinders, it's made me feel like it was like the last time I felt like this was probably playing DMC. In terms of it just being like, when it's like really going, it's electrifying. And there's a boss fight against a kind of like lady robot thing. And that point I was just like, this is fucking awesome. Like, and it does some really cool things with music and it kind of annoys me that a lot of the game is just running from A to B around this kind of drab open world when you're just like, come on. But I know also, because I know Platinum games, that part of me thinks, all right, actually maybe when it gets to like playthrough 4, 5, 6, I would not be surprised if it does the Platinum thing that all Platinum games do of just ramping up into like just loads of boss fights, because they just do boss fights so well. And actually, I kind of believe people when they say the best is yet to come, because I wonder if it's like, it's just going to increasingly cut out all of this fluff and just become like batshit bosses all the time. Because like when it's in that mode, when it's like, hey, you're fighting these massive things and it's all exploding, awesome.
But structurally, why not? I mean, would you agree that the Bayonetta or DMC structure of you play through it once, it gives you all of those boss fights, it gives you everything it's got in the first playthrough, which is a bit longer than 10 hours, and then it goes, now you can go again on I'm a badass difficulty. Like that, a game being designed for, just don't make me do it 7 times. Let me do it twice or 3 times.
Yeah, but and that's what I wonder if actually the second playthrough is very similar, but then after that they might just be, because of the way it's done it makes sense.
They would have to be crackers to keep fantastic boss fights out of the first 2 playthroughs.
But that's the thing. They are.
They are and they aren't, though.
I think, there's Platinum, but there's also the Nier guys. Like, the Nier was bonkers. And this is why I can't quite get a measure for it, because the game does odd things. One of the basic things it does, which is gives you an idea of like the baseline strangeness going on, because you're a robot, you equip these chips. And these chips allow you to do different things. Some of them are very boring. It's like, do extra damage with melee attacks, do extra damage with have extra defense. But some of them actually are new mechanics. Like, when you dodge, like you can slow time for like 2 seconds. Bayonetta as hell, But you have limited space.
Which time?
Yeah, which time? You have limited space for these. So if you want to be able to counter, for example, that'll take some slots up. If you want to be able to do this, and you can upgrade these chips and you can remove them, but you have this space. And it's like a little like this one takes 18 slots, this one takes 6. But every HUD element in the game, like your health, your recharge meter for all your special things, and even simple things like, being able to like see how much health enemies have, being able to see what level enemies are, being able to see the mini-map, they are all chips. They are all things that you can remove, right? So when you turn off elements of the HUD, it's not just being like, I don't want to see that. It's you don't see it, but then also you have more points
to spend really funny.
On and in the early stages of the game, before you upgrade your thing so you can equip more stuff, that's huge. But what's lovely about it is, unlike most games, most modern Western games where they overload players with too much information and you switch it off because you just don't want that noise.
Yeah.
And I mean, I'm kind of formulating a video about this now, which is probably going to be about Zelda, which is why that is. In this, it's like actually almost all of the information it gives you is quite vital. And so when you're cutting it away, it's like you are actually
actually making the game harder.
You're making the game harder. You're diminishing your own experience for power, which is an interesting element. Like, I mean, there's an even simple thing. Like I was like, I'll cut off this thing that shows me like text pop-ups because I don't like text popping up on the screen. But then whenever you pick up an item, you don't know what it was. And that was like, actually, that's a problem. Like, I kind of want to know what I'm picking up. So I had to,
You have to reinstall the chip.
But it does odd things. And like I say, I'm on the second playthrough and it's from a second perspective and I get that. But it's like, I know there's more. And I'm like, I've started to realize that it's probably going to be, I don't know where it's going to go after the second playthrough. So actually, in a weird way, it has this story that is like not super accomplished in terms of execution, but is constantly intriguing enough and constantly enticing enough that I'm always like, I'm playing more because I just want to know what's next. And I had the same thing with Deadly Premonition, except the difference, of course, is in this, the combat is really quite accomplished and fun, if maybe not quite juicy enough for me.
I don't want to talk about it too much because I'm doing a video on Stories Untold next week. That is then going to be talked about more on the Daft Souls after that.
Sure.
But Stories Untold is exactly the same thing of a narrative that is just so willfully obscure, just intriguing enough to tug you through. But it resolves in 4 hours. There is something that rubs me up the wrong way of people, anyone who says this is interesting and then ignoring the fact that it is interesting, but the designers are kiting that out over tens of hours.
Yeah.
Which is it's not just that it's annoying to me as an adult, but that makes the medium that much more inaccessible.
Yes. No. And I agree with that. And this is the problem with it. I'm enjoying it, but I just wish I could notch the pace up a bit because I'm having no difficulty with the combat at all. I'm just breezing through everything it throws at me. But the thing that I cannot accelerate is the process of having to run around the world. Even simple things like, you do unlock fast travel in the game, so you can just cut out a lot of this going A to B running around. But then when you get to the new game thing, it's like you don't have fast travel again. And you're like, okay, I get that. But I kind of wish it was a bit more respectful of my time, but I'm still really interested in where it's going. And crucially, the combat is fun enough to the fact that you are just running around doing a lot of similar stuff, it's still fun. It's still a lot of fun. It's just a case of I'm interested to see where it goes.
Sure.
But it's fun. It's cute. I still don't understand why people have gone ballistic for it, but I'm willing to keep pushing on and try and see why.
Yeah, I can see that. Should we discuss It Came from the Desert?
Yeah, God, it's time to stop stepping on child's hoods.
Don't step on my child.
So, Quentin, you were a
I was stretching.
sad,
oh my God.
lonely boy who his only friend in the world was a digital fictional giant ant. Tell us a bit about that.
That is absolutely not the role that this game played. So let's talk about Cinemaware, who were a company that existed in the late 80s and early 90s, and they made games that Rock Paper Shotgun described expertly as not inspired by a film, but inspired by films in general.
Yeah.
Like the idea that if games could just be like films,
everything would be fine.
Then they would be accepted as a proper medium.
I'd never actually heard about these guys before this, so I now want to go and kind of look through all the games and see if there's any I played or heard of.
Matt's talking about the Cinemaware collection that's on Steam. It's about £8, and that is certainly a lot of ideas and nonsense for £8. because all of these games don't quite go where you expect. Structurally, they're all different. And despite the fact that these games have the like incredibly disappointing remit of what if games were like films, the side effects of what they actually produced is games that are structurally completely fascinating.
Yeah.
This is ironically they're more interactive, despite chasing after a medium which involves players just watching passively. Actually, Cinemaware's games, in trying to make you feel like you were in a film, have all kinds of crazy stuff happening. So I put you in front of It Came From the Desert, which I was too young for, but it was recommended I played by people who knew more about games than me. Because it's so
when did
weird.
you go back to it then?
I went back to it probably about 5 years after it released in 1997.
Okay.
Oh no, I think the game came out in 89, so it would have been 94. Anyway, I don't know what we get then. So why don't you describe what It Came From the Desert is?
It's kind of a fascinating thing. And obviously, in case you haven't been following this, you can watch a video of us playing this game on our YouTube channel on coolghost.net. Or just going YouTube Cool Ghosts.
A whole good 15 minutes of Matt and I laughing at
maybe
insane.
20. I haven't edited it yet. We'll have to see.
Ooh.
But yeah, so it's kind of bizarre, but basically it's an adventure game where you can choose the locations you want to go to, like a normal adventure game. However, in this, there is a clock constantly ticking, and you can go around the town, talk to people, do things.
Yeah, we're in a dusty Arizona town called Lizard Breath.
Yeah, Lizard Breath.
And you're a geologist, and only you know that giant ants are mutating, and they're going to wipe this town off the map. Everyone will die.
Yeah, so it's
Unless.
basically, unless you can do the classic adventure game thing of having the right events and the right things in the right order and saving them. So it's kind of the traditional, very traditional adventure game format of there is a way to do this, and you need to be in the right place at the right time and do these things. But with this, you can get it wrong in a different way, rather than it just being like, you died, so start the game again or reload. It's just like, you've got this much time to save the town, otherwise the ants are going to come. So it's kind of like Groundhog Day.
Rather than an 8-hour playthrough, it's like a 2-hour playthrough that you then do again.
Groundhog Day with giant ants.
Yes.
Which is great.
But what's key is that, unlike a lot of adventure games where, and this is where you get into the Cinemaware vibe, if you failed in adventure games, a lot of the time it would cause death or it wouldn't work. You just can't do that. You have to follow the thread of things we have chosen for you. Whereas It Came From the Desert is, you can go to the bar when no one's there. You can talk to the weird cultists. You can look at the wrong sample. The very start of the game is a geologist buddy of yours brings you, a man knows you're a geologist and brings you a sample of weird rocks from a meteorite crash site. And if you look at the wrong one, as happens in our video, you just get a house fire.
Yeah. And then it activates a mini game we have to put out a fire.
Yeah, and this is the thing. It constantly sort of, any moment where something exciting would happen to your character, it wants to put you in the driving seat. When an ant attacks, it's not a cutscene of you running away like you'd get in, I don't know, Monkey Island or something.
Mini game.
You have to shoot the antenna off the ants.
Yeah. And it keeps throwing these strange...
you didn't see it, but there's a knife fight minigame.
What?
Where the local toughs, they don't like you and your science ways, and you have to beat them in a knife fight.
Wow.
Or get shanked.
It's actually reminded me a lot of Twin Peaks.
Yes.
Of just being like slightly strange and having like overtly odd characters and things, but then also having this sort of like the city squares who were like, I don't know what this is about. This is a very normal place. And it's like, no, it isn't.
Yeah, of course, Twin Peaks came out after It Came From the Desert, so we can see where David Lynch got his inspirations from.
Literally all of his ideas from
every single one.
games.
But you're right, though. It has, and actually, this is a whole other thing that, I mean, my friends wanted me to play it because structurally it's insane. Like the ability to, their attempt to try and model an entire town of, and that thing that we'd later see in like Harvest Moon and Persona and stuff, of like, well, you can't go to the general store now, it's closed. And you go, no, but I needed to do that today. And then you have to go to sleep. But the thing that stuck with me when I played it as a kid wasn't any of the interesting game design stuff it did. It was what you're talking about. It's that tonally, it was really upsetting.
Yeah, no, it's ominous.
None of the humans act quite like real humans because of Cinemaware's weird writing. Like that, you were present for a scene where a woman rings you up and then you go to her cultist lodge, and rather than the woman talking to you, it's just the weird cult leader.
Just like a fish.
Yep, and the woman says nothing in the entire scene. You know there are ants.
The whole thing does have like the kind of stressful vibe of a nightmare.
It does, yeah.
Which is like there's this ominous sense that you know something terrible is going to happen, and you're trying to convince everyone, but no one's listening.
You're totally right, and
it's like, oh, you've got to listen to me.
So you get attacked by an enormous, terrifying ant in a monstrous minigame. You shoot off its antenna, and you're like, Jesus. And then you go to the mayor. And the mayor goes, sounds like you're full of shit, son.
Yeah.
Get out.
Yeah, let us to leave our nice little town.
You go to the
away.
radio station, they're not interested. You go to the newspaper, they're not interested. But all of this, and that is your central problem. It's that people don't trust you. And that is actually something quite rare for games. My wife was at an AI conference on Monday, and Emily Short is working with this company that's doing essentially they're doing AI-related conversational games. But one of the things that was present in this AI that was demoed on stage is that Lee was really impressed by, is that it would close up. So it wasn't just that you have to ask the right questions or pursue the right sort of evidence threads like in her story.
Right.
But you have to do it the right way, and the AI will shut up. You have to talk to the AI nicely. And that kind of gentle conversational approach tends not to be done in games.
Well, it's even the fact that we've, over the past 10 years, it's sort of clearing up now in favor of Cthulhu, which is the new black. But zombie games, for example, for ages and ages and ages, like this is kind of the equivalent of a zombie game where rather than it being like, oh, zombies, kill the zombies, it's like the point where things are kind of going weird and no one's listening. Like, it's kind of like, oh, there's a weird thing going on over there. Like,
yeah.
What's going on? Like, what was that thing I listened to recently? It was Pontypool, which I know got made into a film, which was okay, but it's really enjoyable as a kind of radio play production. You can listen to it for free on YouTube because it's like told from the perspective of a radio station. So it's like, it's wonderful in the fact that when you're listening to it on headphones, it's like you're listening to a radio show, but then it's like has the bits where when they're broadcasting, it sounds like this and hello, welcome to that. But then it's like they cut it off and then it's a bit more incidental and just conversations. But again, that's kind of a story about the outbreak. And what's most striking about it is the fact that people are like, no, like weird things happen and people go, that's nothing. It's probably nothing. They're just mad or whatever. Like, and it's that point of like, by the time people actually start to go, and like with a real thing, like in this scenario, it's like with the ants. Like by the time people start to go, oh, actually, hang on, no, he was right. It's too late.
Yeah.
Like, and it's that window of like just trying to convince everyone that actually no, the world is about to collapse, because zombie films, zombie games always have that as like, incidental background in the start is being like reports today about an unusual outbreak of violence in a hospital, and you're like, oh yeah. But actually a game about that bit where you've seen that and you're just going around trying to convince the local newspapers and convince the police that this is fucking that's cool.
It's interesting, isn't it? And it's in a weird way. It Came from the Desert is the most unhuman and the most human adventure game that I played as a kid. Unhuman because, like you say, it's incredibly weird and surreal. Because within text adventures, it's very difficult to do human beings.
Yeah.
Like, it's the uncanny valley writ large. And yet it wanted to tell a human story. Cinemaware wanted to give you games that were... sorry, I've lost my thread because I've just remembered, I think, a game called KGB, which was also just the most deeply unsettling adventure game where you play a member of the KGB, and it's awful because you have so little to go on in both of these games of just tiny, thin sentences. And it is like a nightmare because you can't express the complicated feelings that you've got.
It is as well. I think the thing I would say, the final thing I'd say anyway about It Came from the Desert is that it is actually, it's such a simple little twist on the classic format of that adventure game. Of all it is most of the time in an adventure game, to progress, you need to do a certain thing in a certain order. And if you can go to all these different locations, the way that these games used to handle that is you can't go to these locations. You can go to one of these 3 locations, or like it would be like there's 20 locations you can go to, but right now you can only go to these ones just to keep you in there. But by doing the system where it's like you can go anywhere at any point, it basically just means it's the same format, but you can really easily just waste all of your time. And the failing of it, I find really, the thing that makes you think, God, this is such a cool idea, but the execution is pop, is the fact that so often if you just go to a place where there's nothing there, then you've just wasted like 4 hours and it's just like nothing happens. Like you don't even get an incidental conversation with someone that you realize was a waste of time. It's just like, yeah, the bar's closed.
Well, they had to animate a lot of ants.
No, they did. Fair. And it's a game that came out a long time ago. But it's like, wow, now with more resources and more time and more writing.
Well, the thing you said in the video
awesome.
is this is in a lot of ways the game that Deadly Premonition should have been.
Yes.
Because the thing everyone loves about Deadly Premonition is, the characters, the stories, the weirdness, the driving around.
But it has this whole town you can just go to at different times and do things, but that's
not where the game is.
No, it never requires that.
No, because it was like they wanted to make a third-person action-y game in a sort of Silent Hill stripe or Resident Evil stripe. Whereas actually, maybe if they'd grown up playing It Came from the Desert, they would realize you don't need any of that combat. You can just have awkward conversations and very sporadically ants
Oh,
or
man.
whatever you want to replace the ants with.
That would be a great mod for Deadly Premonition. Just
Giant
remove all of the combat.
Are you kidding? That's what I wanted from that game.
I mean, it would be better.
I mean, we've talked about this, but that's what I want from Mass Effect as well. And what I think a lot of,
it kind of is weird that they don't do, because it does seem increasingly that the main people who love Mass Effect are people who just want to go and like seduce aliens. So I kind of find it weird that they haven't made that. But again, it's maybe this sort of weird stigma of like, no, you can't be putting out games about shagging aliens and nothing else. But it's like, go on, EA, you'll make loads of money.
Do you think we have any questions about shagging aliens in our mailbag?
I don't know, but let's have a look in our mailbag. Question time. Hello there. Why don't you relax? Take off those shoes. It's time for a question from you.
The way you said that made that sound like a mailman. A mailman's bag. That's also not what I was trying to express.
Bag.
A mail bag. You don't want to separate those two words.
I know. You're right, I don't, but I did. Before we go into questions, I just want to really briefly mention actually something. We had a comment on, and we're always saying, at the end of videos, come and look at coolghost.net, look at comments on the videos there.
Oh, yeah.
And it's because you always get like at least 2 or 3 comments underneath the video, which are as worth looking at.
No, that are more worth looking at than on Shut Up and Sit Down and Cool Ghosts both. The most upvoted comment is like better than anything we've said in the content.
Yeah, it's kind of actually like a lot of the time I find, especially with YouTube comments, they often don't really add much.
Yes.
Every now and then they do. Every now and then you get something great, but majority of the time it's just fluff. Whereas with comments, if you have a dedicated comment place where people can come because they have something they want to say rather than just reactively saying something because it's a part of the platform and the way you're supposed to use it.
Yeah, YouTube comments are the equivalent of that thing where you hit someone's knee with a hammer and it flings up.
Exactly.
It's say anything.
People have been trained to do that. It's part of the way the platform works. It's not people's fault. It's just that people have been conditioned to leave comments.
Yeah.
So anyway, one of the comments we had on the last podcast that I just thought, it was kind of weird, but it really stuck with me. It was a guy called, perhaps a guy or a girl, I don't know, called D, who talked about living with horses, because we'd been talking about horses, and talked about it was sad when they'd inevitably died. It was kind of a strange comment that grabbed me, but it went on for a bit. And the part of this long comment that I really liked was talking about...
This is great.
Yeah, it was saying, this is interesting, basically, because we were talking about how when we talk about games that like we love, that are all outdoor and exploratory, and this person loathes, they say, I chalk this up to there being Londoners and not having a lot of green space available. And so, see, one of the things I do to pay for my health insurance is walk dogs for my neighbours up and down the mountain I live on. So already this person is awesome. So foot travel isn't about the view at the end for me, it's about the process. It's about checking to make sure I have all of my equipment and is in the easiest, most accessible layout, and then being in the moment, constantly supervising these horrible, naughty animals. The world is not a picturesque vista. Well, it is, but it's one that's full of corpses. Seriously, there are more dead things out in the woods than you will ever realise until you have to travel through the land with a willful Yorkie pup at your side. Or maybe it says Yorkie poo. Maybe it's Yorkie poo is a type. I almost said brand of dog. That would be
Oh, you are such a Londoner.
A brand of dog. It says, I don't want my games to simulate walks for me. I want the opportunity to pretend to possess a power and sway over the world and my circumstance that the existence of my neighbour's Yorkie with his endless stubbornness implicitly denies me the little rat. So I just thought it was an interesting thing. And I was walking up some hills again last weekend and it kind of reminded me, like I did walk past a couple of very dead things. And I was like, oh yeah, like there is this tendency for us to be like, I walked up a hill
walking is magical.
And I saw this view, and actually this reality of it's not all about hills and vistas. And actually nature and the real world is just full of dead stuff everywhere.
I've definitely talked about this in like Daft Souls like 1 or 2 or 5 or something. But the moment in Red Dead Redemption where the game absolutely peaks for me is when early on you are staying in a farm, like a ranch rather. And they have horses, they have cows, I think. Anyway, the horses get scared because it's a thunderstorm. And it's one of the most tense moments in the game because the person who owns the stable says, they're going to run off. They're going to run off a cliff. They're just going to die. And it's so tense. And all you need to do is guide the cows to safety.
Yeah.
But it's a moment that instills the pure terror of like, I guess, reality of how nature is just unbelievably dangerous in weird ways that you don't assume, that you don't think about. It made the world.
I remember that as well.
It sticks with you.
And it's weird that like it's really stressful that all these cows are going to kill themselves, and that'd be sad. But then for the rest of the game, I was more than happy to just go and blast the fuck out of every raccoon I saw or whatever.
Well, right, yeah, that is a problem or a thing.
Yeah.
But yes, I think there's certainly we're currently in the phase of nature is nice. We are enjoying nature, but I think that's all. But I'm far more interested right now, purely because we don't have it, in let's explore nature at the sharper side of it, and that's why the Long Dark interests me so much, because you see a forest in Horizon Zero Dawn. I keep coming back to that because whatever, it's current. But you see a forest in that and you're like, oh, a forest, I will tramp through it, la, 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 la. Whereas you see a forest in Long Dark and you go, that's going to confuse me. I don't want to go in that because I'll lose my way.
It's still interesting though that to me it's like, I think what this comment made me realize, and was an interesting point, is that in some ways, whilst things are constantly evolving, constantly changing, some things never change and stay the same. And in many ways, in the same way that affluent citygoers have basically romanticized the country forever. There's always been that thing of I'm going to go and live in the country. Well, not forever, but ever since, because we've had urban societies,
right?
People are like, the country. I want to move to the country, and this romanticized view of the wilderness. And in a way, the Long Dark is just another element of that. It's a romanticization of survival and traditional basics.
It's kind of the least romantic survival game I've played,
but it's a different kind of romanticism. It's romanticizing stuff in the same way that like Midlake by Roscoe's first album about what it'd be like to be to live in the 1800s and be someone with an axe and have to chop wood to make yourself a roof, and it would be hard. No,
you know what? That is so many survival games. That is absolutely Minecraft. But the Long Dark is it's more of a horror game, or at least the early build of it. And it's completely fair that you would assume that. But the fun thing about it is that I don't know. It's slightly different from what you're saying. What you're saying is 50% correct, and it's 50% unfair to.
But you're still surviving. You're still
it's the current build is like you survive for a short period of time and you die.
Well, fair enough. But I mean, I think it's just
you're not thriving.
I'm not saying that that's exactly what that game is, but it's definitely the place it came from. It might have evolved into something else, but all of these games, all of these things come from this romanticization of the wilderness and the wild or the country. And
fun thing, do you know about 130 years ago, there were games that romanticized living in a city?
Exactly.
There were board games that, because cities were kind of, they'd captured the public imagination. There are American board games that are around 1880, which are themed around go to the city, and then you land on a space and it's like, you are mugged, or like you roll another and it's like, you have lost all of your moral fiber.
Well, that makes sense when you had a world where like people did live in cities, and increasingly lots of people lived in cities, but you still had lots of people not living in cities. Whereas now, when, in like the Western world, especially like, the majority of people, like not the majority of people, but most people live in cities, like, it's high density
or large towns, certainly places
affluence.
where they don't necessarily have access to, nature outside of their front door.
Yeah, it kind of makes sense that like that's kind of like where the money is, and so that's where the things are. And it's just like an interesting thing. Like, in some ways, like, you don't have many games about exploring cities, or when you do, they're like the big cities
but then
everyone wants to go to.
Why
New York.
now? Why are these games coming out now? Like, this was still the case when video games were in their heyday of like 80s, 90s, noughties. Why has this stuff cropped up now?
I think it's interesting. That's actually an interesting topic for people if they want to go to the website and say what they think.
Certainly say what they think. I'll throw in that I think it's probably something to do with the same surge of Whole Foods and farm to table nonsense.
But again, I think it's always been there. I think it's just now like technical stuff is increasingly, especially because you have to remember that video games when they started out, they were not just the reserve of the affluent. They were things that everyone did in pubs and arcade machines.
I mean, they still are the reserve of the affluent. They're still the thing that everyone does on their phones. This is where that, like, the stat that 42% or 48% of video game players are women. But it's just like the noisy members of the game press consider certain games more valid.
But that's why it's interesting that really, if you look at the serious games, AAA games, proper games area, a lot of it is these big open world, it's experiences of being in open, endless places.
I feel like we're enjoying the openness is something we're thriving at because the tech is there.
Possible.
But Matt, I feel sorry for the people languishing in. Matt used the mouse and I used the keyboard at the same time.
Yes,
our eyes met.
But no, I think it's an interesting question. People should talk about that in the comments and say what they think, because I'd be interested to hear what people think.
We should talk about us kissing.
Let's do a question.
Yogi B says, if you're not, sorry, every week. If you're not aware, we get questions in the world's best way on the Daft Souls podcast. If you go to coolghosts.net, you click on Daft Souls, you can navigate your way to our question thread. And what people can do there is they can leave comments and they can upvote other comments. We can delete the comments. All questions are public. It's entirely transparent.
Yeah.
If only the damn politicians would.
The way it works is that the most highly rated questions are the ones that we answer, and then once they're answered, they get deleted forever. So we don't answer them again. And yeah, but it also means that even if you don't have a question that you want to ask, you can just go and maybe upvote some of the ones that you think you'd like to hear answered.
Speaking of politicians, the format of Prime Minister's Question Time in the UK is now adopting what they're calling the Cool Ghosts format.
Are they actually?
That's a fact.
That's a made-up fact.
Yogi B writes, I've seen a bunch of commentary on The Witness saying things like, all you get when you solve puzzles is more puzzles, and it made me wonder about what makes games enjoyable. Do puzzle games need story nuggets or unlockables after solving something hard? Do all RPGs, or even shooters like Destiny, need loot and progression systems? Is pure gameplay enough nowadays, or do games need, air quotes, rewards to be truly fun and to keep people playing? It is a tremendously weird... It's a great question because the answer is so thorny and odd.
It is, isn't it?
I feel like so much of it is to do with expectation, because I think about some of the greatest... Let's stay on the subject of puzzle games for now to like make sure we don't go fully mad. I think about some of the greatest puzzle games that I played. I think about The Witness, sure, but I also think about Space Chem by Zachtronics, which is just a phenomenal puzzle game. And I think about...
Infinifactory is your favourite?
Infinifactory came late, was the sequel to Space Chem, basically. Yeah, but Infinifactory is, it's probably what I'd point people towards, but that does have story. So I'm going to stick to Space Chem. I'm going to think of Guru Logic Champ and the GBA. Jesus Christ, that's a blast from the past. But those were games which had no story. They're just, it was just puzzles that were so good. And by not having story, I didn't mind that. But you mentioned Infinifactory, right?
I mean, I haven't played it. I actually found that Space Chem was too hard for me. I wasn't interested. I bounced off it because I just thought this is too hard and not rewarding. So I think puzzle games is unfortunately such a wide genre that what people want from it is massively different.
Well, just to finish my thread, so Space Chem doesn't have anything between the levels, and very little, and that's fine. But Infinifactory sometimes does. And so while these games are completely okay if they don't have rewards, it's if I expect a reward and I don't get it, then I'm annoyed. And so if you are going to have rewards in your game, it's more about that it has consistent rewards.
Yeah.
And actually, I remember when The Witness annoyed me the most is when your grand reward, and this isn't a spoiler, but when you play The Witness pointing giant. How far did you get in The Witness?
I don't know. I mean, it's very hard to tell how far I got because it's kind of nebulous in terms of just being like.
How many lasers did you point at the mountain?
Oh, a couple.
Okay. So when you point enough lasers at the mountain, guess what happens?
You go to the mountain.
Right. But when you are inside it, it's another world of puzzles before you get to the end of the game. That was the point that drove me insane because it was the game the game had led me to believe in its structuring that my opening the mountain would be a reward, and it actually leads you to the hardest puzzles in the game. And so The Witness would have been fine if it was just me pottering around and solving puzzles, but the moment I had to put it down was when I didn't get the consequence that I was expecting.
Yeah, I mean, that's why I sort of didn't really get into The Witness, because I felt, it's interesting, I've never seen anyone say that actually, even though people have been saying that, being like, all you get when you solve puzzles is more puzzles.
Oh, but that's
kind of how I felt about it.
That sentence is nonsense though, because that is every single video game. If you solve a level, you get another level.
No, I know.
That's your
I know,
reward.
but I mean, I'm not saying that like...
The problem is that you didn't enjoy the puzzles. Otherwise, getting more puzzles would delight you.
Yeah, no, I think that's it. I think that the problem I found with it was I found that the puzzles were more frustrating than enjoyable. And I found that when I had the period where I worked it out, I often found that... Well, it was a combination of things, actually. I think I found that when I worked out the puzzle, I often found that the actual execution of doing the puzzle, even that when you knew how to do it, then executing it, I found a lot of them, not all of them, but a lot of them then took longer to do than I wanted.
The reason I like it is that you're talking about being good at one half of the win. So figuring out how the puzzles are solved is one half of the win. Actually solving them is the other half. And why I enjoy it is because it's a mix of perfect logical thinking and then lateral thinking. And I think some of The Witness was some of my favorite moments of gaming in that year, when you realize what puzzles refer to and the way they refer to elements outside of the puzzle.
Yeah.
Is just when you're figuring it out, you have that thing that Jonathan Blow also did in Braid, where you go, oh, that's so clever. Oh, I'm so clever. Oh, the designer is so clever.
I didn't get that with
everyone
it.
Is clever.
That's the thing. And I got that with Braid, but I didn't get it so much with The Witness. I think I just found, I don't know if I was trying to go through it with too much pace or was expecting more from it.
You might have just picked some boring puzzles to... I also just like that it puts puzzles in front of you that you can't solve yet, which I shouldn't like, but I do. And then anyway.
Yeah, no, you learn the language and then you can.
Yeah, but we're getting off topic. So let's get back to the nut of the question. Do games need nuggets are unlockables after solving something.
You see,
hard.
I think that no, but I think for me, the trick, and this is just a personal thing, that what I need to make it is not the reward, it's actually like, and not the kind of progression, but actually it needs to be on the moment to moment is satisfying. So actually a lot of my favorite puzzle games are games where...
Well, let's broaden it. Let's just talk about the idea of...
Well, I was just going to say, like, I really like two games that I really loved that were puzzle games were Pool Blocks on the 3DS, which is like a kind of 3D platformy thing. And again, another similar one, which is a 3D platformy puzzle game, was Catherine. But when I like fact that you have these puzzles that are difficult and obviously very different pace. Catherine, you've got to be really on it and constantly working out what you're going to do next. But I like that it's a puzzle where you never have that period of going, oh, I know how to do this puzzle, but now it's just, I'm going to have to enter it. Because I'm the sort of person where as soon as I understand a puzzle, I just want to go and do it. And I don't want to have any time wasted by the act of, because then I find that by the time I've finished the puzzle, even if it's like 5 seconds, I feel that all my satisfaction of having finished the puzzle is gone because I'm like, oh, come on, just do it.
Okay, but you are talking about the thing that I was going to say, which is that ideally in a game, you don't need a reward because the puzzle itself, the challenge itself is the most fun thing.
Yeah.
If you've structured your game such that you need rewards, if it's like, oh, I did this unenjoyable thing, but now I get something nice, then already the game is massively flawed because you didn't enjoy the thing in the first place.
Yeah, which is a huge problem with what he's talking about with RPGs and loot and progression systems, because it's so easy with that to find yourself playing and doing things and see people making complaints about Destiny or games like Ubisoft's shit Christmas simulator. I can't remember the Division.
Shit Christmas? What?
The Division. And basically like see people going, oh yeah, it sucks. I've got to like kill this boss like 30 times or something. It's like, well, no, what? Like, and I think it's so easy to fall into that. It's so easy for those systems to take over and then have people complain about having to play the game.
The ultimate version of this is the ultimate version of how complicated the answer to this question is that we haven't talked about in the podcast yet is the Duelist expansion. So Duelist being the card game that Matt and I love to pieces, or we used to.
Yeah, I want to check it out again because they've added more stuff now.
But it has the same purchasing card system.
Does it?
Yeah. So what we're talking about here is that Duelist was a game we love to pieces. Tactically, we think it's far. We prefer it to Hearthstone. Let's not get into that kind of.
We've done that. Move
on. So they usually with Duelist, you play and you get gold, and then that lets you buy a booster pack full of cards. Great. They released an expansion recently called Blood something. Let's call it the Blood expansion. Blood spell?
Bloodborne, I think.
No, it's not Bloodborne. They wouldn't call
something
it
like that.
Let's call it Blood spell because we're unprofessional. But the thing about the Blood spell expansions, it was a massive wad of new cards that you could buy in one go. You could give them $20 and immediately receive all of the cards, which was great. Most exciting thing in the world. Matt and I both did it, and as soon as we did, what happened?
The game wasn't fun.
Yep.
And the game wasn't fun for two reasons. It was the fact that partly because everyone had done this, it meant everyone had all of the cards, so you didn't get much variation with decks, and people were just using optimal decks.
Yep.
Also, it meant that there was less variation with styles. Like you have, like usually before then, you have like 4 or 5 different tactics that any one class might do. But because all of these new cards were great, and because everyone had all of the good cards you needed to build this deck, which was rare, it just meant you kept playing against the same deck type again and again. And
okay,
again.
So that's not what I was going to say.
And that's half of it, but then the other half was you lost the joy of getting things.
Yes, so it being a game where, as a human, you've associated the value of all the cards with a card is worth this much excitement in my head. And so obviously, Matt and I wasn't even playing Duelist at the time, but I wanted to buy that expansion because, oh my God, so many new cards. And then immediately having that many cards instantly devalued every single card in my collection. And I didn't care about collecting new cards anymore.
Yeah.
So I only bring that up, and obviously all the structural stuff Matt says is true. And what's interesting, though, is that in the real world, I actually prefer the format. I prefer buying expansion cards. Because in the real world, you don't have this is a side thing, but in the real world, you don't have as much refinement of the same decks. If people are playing 1,000 games of Duelist,
you don't play as many games.
You just don't. People don't play as many games, and you don't have the cross-pollination of deck ideas. So with Duelist, people can immediately find perfect decks.
And it was a two-way street with Duelist of like you play, and you'd lose, and you'd be like, oh. And you could always have that sense that maybe if you had some better cards, then you'd be doing better. And maybe that's not true. Half the time it's not true. Like you're not playing as well as you could be. But knowing you didn't have full access stuff, and as soon as you have full access stuff, you lose the impetus to keep playing because in a way, it was great because it means if you'd be doing really well, then that'd be great. But maybe you weren't doing that well. But then you get a great new card and you're like, I'm going to rebuild my deck with this card. So it always kept with that momentum. But but it was bizarre because on paper, that change was like amazing. And we were like, oh, this is brilliant. Well done. And actually, in reality, it just completely immediately killed our enthusiasm for the game.
Yeah.
So yeah, sometimes the right answers are not good ones.
So we've given, a bunch of answers to this question, but hey, what a great question.
Thank you very much for listening to the Daft Souls podcast. We'll be back in a couple of weeks to talk about some other stuff.
I'm going to play more Rain World, and I'm going to tell you what it's like to die in a wet factory.
I'm going to try and complete Nier 5 more times and tell you if it's worth buying. Yeah. Thank you for listening. If you've really enjoyed this, a couple of things you can do quickly. If you've got the time and the inclination, you give us a review on iTunes if you fancy it. You could pop to Cool Ghosts.
Do those reviews really make a difference, Matt?
I don't know, but it's
that's not what you say. You say yes, they do, because they do.
Okay, they do.
They drive us up the charts.
I don't know.
They massively increase visibility because your reviews actually kind of fade with age as well.
Oh yeah, they do. Yeah.
So yeah, if it's important for you new person listening to this, even if we have 200 reviews, because the fact that we have 200 reviews doesn't matter. What matters is how many reviews we got recently.
Are we hot now?
We're not. We're freezing cold.
Oh, I'm so cold in this underwear.
Please warm us up.
Just take the photo so we can go home.
And body.
Yeah, do that. Why not? Or if you really love the podcast, you could always think about supporting us on Patreon, which is Patreon/Cool Ghosts. And just maybe a couple of quid.
Isn't it patreon.com/?
Yeah, it probably is. Yeah. I mean, you'll find it. It's Google
it's some nouns.
Is a beautiful tool.
Just chuck in Patreon, Cool Ghosts. Those are words.
Either way, mainly thank you so much for listening. We enjoy doing it, and we will see you next time
with episode 92.
92.
92.
Ooh. Goodbye.
Bye.